You are listening to Preconceived, where we examine the preconceptions that shape how we view the world and the paradigms by which we live our lives. Hey everybody, I'm Zale Mednick, and welcome to another episode of Preconceived. Money can't buy you happiness, so the adage goes. But deep down, I think it's fair to say, most people would still like to have more money in their pockets if given that opportunity. And despite the notion that money perhaps does not equal happiness, many people do spend their lives with a primary goal of making more money. So let's examine this adage a bit more closely. Does money make people happier? Is there a certain threshold beyond which people are finally content with the amount of money they have? Or does the desire to accumulate wealth and things just continue, regardless how much one already has? I'm joined today by Clay Cockrell. Clay is a psychotherapist in New York City with over 25 years experience. Over the past several years, he has been working with ultra-high-networth individuals to help them navigate the complications that accompany having lots of money. Clay, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
It's always strange for me when I'm interviewing somebody else who runs a podcast, but because you've been on this side, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of odd for me to be on this side, so we'll both have
Well,
a learning curve.
I'm really glad to have you here. I think your work is super interesting, and it's a really apt topic to discuss for this podcast. How did you get involved? You started on Wall Street, and then you became a therapist. How did that evolve?
Well, I'm originally from Kentucky in the United States, and my wife is an actress. And so we needed to be in New York where all the theater was. And I always kind of felt like I was born in the wrong place. So I always wanted to be in New York. But I came to New York with a master's degree in clinical social work, which is very similar to a master's degree in psychology. So I worked on the mental health side of an insurance company on Wall Street. And just because I was a little scared about starting a private practice because in New York, therapy is everywhere. It's it's a competitive market. And I thought, I can't run a business like that. But eventually I started slow and started seeing clients. And my wife had this great idea. All good things come from my wife. She said, why don't you walk with your clients instead of meet in an office? And being a man, I said, oh, honey, you can't do that. That's just, and she said, why? And I really couldn't explain why you couldn't do it. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is confidentiality. What if somebody overhears what you're saying? But it's New York. Nobody's paying any attention to anybody else. You walk by celebrities all the time. You're just like, okay, whatever. And I found some quiet places in Central Park, and the idea just took off. And what became is something to differentiate me from other therapists. It became something that I really believed in, because I think that when you are out in nature and walking, we begin to think outside the box and begin to really go deep in what's bothering us. And there's a lot of benefits to it. People loved it, and my clients started showing progress in their issues and getting better. And somebody stumbled upon the idea from the Wall Street Journal. And so all of a sudden I have had this big write-up in the Wall Street Journal. And then Good Morning America, big morning show here in the US, found out about it. And all of a sudden I'm walking through the park with Juju Chang of Good Morning America, and boom, I had a practice because of all this quirky media stuff. So yeah, that's the short version of a really wild ride of starting a private practice in Manhattan.
It's a really neat idea, and it definitely challenges that paradigm of traditional therapy, especially when you think back to the days where it's not as common anymore, but with psychoanalysis where people were lying down.
Mm-hmm.
Very different from kind of going for a walk in the park together.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I thought I was so unique, but somebody told me that Freud actually would walk with some of his clients back in the 1800s, that he didn't have time in his schedule, but this one guy said, well, I'll walk with you while you have your lunch or between your clients or whatever. And he agreed. And so he actually was the first walk. I have to give him credit. He was the first walk and talk therapist, was Freud.
But it's okay. You're bringing Freud. You're bringing Freud into the
Right.
21st century, so that's
That's
not a
right.
bad thing to have to your name either. So, how did you then get involved in eventually working with people who, as you've described, are ultra high net worth individuals?
Well, because my approach was so unique and outside the box, I think it was attractive to a couple of entrepreneurs who were very busy, who were very successful. And so they found me, and I started working with them. And then my name got passed around a very small group of people. They call them the 1% for a reason. There's not a lot of people that have this kind of ultra high net worth. And my name just got passed around as somebody who does something unique, who takes their problems at face value. Because I've had several people come to me and say, I try to see another therapist and talk to them about my problems, and I feel embarrassed about them because I was talking about how my husband only gives me an allowance of $75,000 a month, and that's a struggle for me, and I feel like it's unfair because he's making, $50 million a year. And this therapist that I talked to about this problem essentially said, "Why are you complaining? That's not a problem." And so they weren't taking their problems as legitimate. They were, the phrase is, first world problems. These really are first world problems. And I always approached it as first world problems are still problems. And your issue of $75,000 a month is an issue. So let's work on that. Let's talk about communication and values and what are the things that you're spending this on and how much money would you need to meet all your obligations. And so because I had no judgment, I didn't make them feel bad about their problems. More and more people started to hear about me. And then, like I said, my name kind of got passed around this very elite and small world.
Well, that's the perfect example you gave, that 75,000 versus what was the number you said?
I
Five
think he
million?
was making 60, $100 million a year. I mean, he was making a lot of money, and she was trying to pay the staff and college tuitions and, birthday parties that were, $500,000. I mean, it's just like this was not going to be enough for the lifestyle that he and she were expecting. And so it was a real issue.
Well, yeah, because when you talk about happiness and money, as we'll get into, it is all relative. So that's why I like that example, because $70,000 is a ton of money.
Yeah,
But relative to $50 million, no, it's not a lot of money, right? The
right.
math is pretty simple there to see. So everything about this conversation, I think, really does come down to relativity.
Yeah,
So when you're looking at people and you're saying it's just a first world problem, you could say that to so many problems that we all deal with, but we all, as the phrase go, we all cry our own tears. We all have our own personal experiences. And the word first world problems, I think there's maybe benefit in acknowledging that from time to time, that there are people who do not have their basic needs met. But
of course.
our general life experiences, call it first world problems, but it kind of doesn't do justice to the lives we live and the complexities of that.
Right. And what I found about this population is that they don't seek mental health care because it's embarrassing. Money can be very embarrassing, and they have this judgment that they put upon themselves, and society puts upon themselves that they should be happy. These are not real problems, but they are, and so they don't seek out mental health care and therapy because they feel guilty, they feel shame. There's nobody that's going to be able to identify with them, and so they sit on some real struggles. And I think any population is deserves care.
What are some of the main struggles that people encounter because of their money when they speak with you?
Oh, it's different for everyone, really. There is some commonality in this. One is a lot of isolation. It's a small world. They all go to the same resorts. They go to the same islands. Their kids go to the same schools, and it's then hard to relate to people who don't have the same resources. you know. And so your friend who may be a doctor, maybe, and he's pretty well off, but he's not going to be able to fly to London for the afternoon and see this great artwork. And you have people over to your house, and they're like, "Oh my God, you live in a museum." So there, it can be isolating to a small world, and that's problematic. Um,
Do people tend to do people tend to really lose touch with a lot of their friends who aren't in those same economic circles over time?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's across the board. We tend to associate with people who are like us because, let's say, just right out of college, you've got a job and maybe your friends don't yet, and you want to go out to eat at this nice restaurant, but they're eating ramen noodles at home and they can't split the check. And then all of a sudden, there's also issues of expectation of, hey, you've got money, you're driving a Bentley or whatever, why don't you pick up the tab? And that's expected. And so there can be some resentment that comes from that, and awkwardness. See, money is it's a very private thing. I think people are more likely to talk about their sex lives than their bank accounts. It's very private, and that complicates a lot of things.
Do you think money's too private? Do you think that I was having a conversation with somebody who works on the show about this exact topic the other day, not even in relation to this podcast, but it fits well. We were
Yeah.
wondering, is it possible to have friendships where you're more open about money and your finances? And
Yes.
what, what do you think about
But
that?
doesn't that just make your skin crawl?
No, for sure, because we're very open about everything. But on the one hand, I'd like to say that most people aren't envious, but it's a natural human instinct, I think, to be envious.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think that if we could ever, I don't know if we ever will, but if we ever could get to a level of authenticity about our finances, going, this is what I have. Maybe I don't deserve it. Maybe I inherited it. Maybe I won the lottery, but this is what I have, and to be proud of it, and to just be authentic about it, and let other people's journey to acceptance be their journey. And if they've got a problem with it, it's their problem. But if you're comfortable with it, in general, other people are going to be comfortable with it. And some of the wonderful relationships that have happened with people of different socioeconomic means is when you make it funny. You tease one another about how much are you paying for your jet this month, and all this other stuff. I mean, that can humanize it and make it funny. So I appreciate comedy as the great leveler.
Yeah, and like you're saying, kind of just no pun intended, but kind of just own it. This is the kind of life I live,
Yeah,
and that's you know that's the kind of life I live anyway. So we might as well not be afraid to talk about it.
absolutely, absolutely. It makes other people comfortable too. Now, what I've noticed is that there are within this world are really two types of people: those that have grown up with wealth, um, from they have family money, right? And then there are those that are new to wealth. They won the lottery, or they started a company and they grew up middle class, but their company went skyrocket and now they're worth billions of dollars. They are entering into somewhat of a foreign world. So the issues are similar, but they're also very different. And you see this with people who find fame really quickly. It can have a really toxic and debilitating effect on a person because they're not used to it. They don't have the tools, they don't have the vocabulary, versus someone who comes from a world of wealth and back to their grandparents and great grandparents, and they know that world. They know the norms and subtleties and nuances within that world, so they're very familiar. But then, of course, then they don't always have the skills to function outside that world and have friendships with people who are middle class or poor or what have you. So it's two different kind of struggles, two different, yeah.
Yeah, that's very clear. And let's take, for example, the person who comes by wealth later on in life,
Hmm.
not by inheritance, and who is more relatively new to that world of higher society, we'll call it. how long does it take when somebody starts making a lot of money for them to adjust their baseline of expectations to say,
Ugh.
this is a lot of money. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I have $5 million. That's incredible. That's life changing.
Mhm.
At what point does that become normal for them and their happiness level is back to where it was before and they're back on what they call the hedonic treadmill of wanting more?
Oh, that's a tough question. It depends on the person. There are people who never adjust. They're still walking around their mansion and turning off the lights because the light bill is going to go up. There are, they're like, oh my God, this dinner costs whatever, and they could have bought the restaurant 5,000 times over. You know, so it's ingrained early on, or there are people that get a lot of money and they go through it really quickly because they don't know how to take care of wealth. It is a skill, it is a job to make sure that you are not outspending what you have. So there's that issue. But I think you're talking about, on when we look at the happiness level,
Exactly.
is they say some research says about 6 months. About six
Right.
months, it's like something horrible happens to you, right? Like you lose a leg, or a spouse dies, and you're devastated. And they go back 6 months later to a year, and they go, it still hurts, it still is painful, and but I've learned to adjust to it. I've kind of got back to my baseline. Or somebody wins the lottery, or their company goes through the roof, and they've got all this money, and in about 6 months to a year, they go back and go, I've kind of learned to live with it. I'm back to where it was amazing, but my baseline, and I like it to compare it to weight loss, actually, that our body wants to be at a set point. And during the holidays, we may put on a few pounds, but it gradually goes off. Or we may go on a diet and lose 10 or 15 pounds, but it gradually creeps back up. Our body wants to be at a set point. I think our mood and our happiness level wants to be and is at a set point. But here's an interesting thing, is that what we've seen to move, the one thing that moves our set point down toward the level of depression and a lacking of happiness, is the loss of a job. Whether you're fired, or you are laid off, or whatever, or retired, doesn't have to be a bad thing, because our identity is so closely linked to what we do with our life, that when we lose that, it makes our set point goes down toward the depression scale. And then you extrapolate that to people who don't have a job because they don't need to work. That level of identity is something that people struggle with. And it's very fearful with the wealthy and their children. And I know we're bouncing around here,
Oh, this is
but
great.
uh, they a lot of wealthy people are very frightened with the lack of ambition in their children, because why would they need to go to college? Why would they need to work? Because they've got all the resources in the world, but they know that struggle builds character, and you have to have purpose, and you have to have a reason to get up in the morning, or people are not going to do well. It's one of the reasons I believe that Bill Gates has decided not to give his entire multi-billion-dollar fortune to his children. He's going to limit what they inherit, because he knows that money can be very, very dangerous. So, yeah, went in all sorts of different directions you didn't ask, Zale.
Those are all directions I wanted to go. I think those are great points, and you well articulated that. So it's kind of the 6 months is interesting. So you're saying the job loss, for example, that would be beyond 6 months. That might take somebody who's a 7 out of 10, we'll say, on this artificial happiness scale I just created,
Yes.
and that might take them down permanently to a 5 out of 10 unless they readjust until they get a job and find purpose again.
Absolutely. But even sometimes, because it's such a hit, if you got fired, if you got laid off, if you got rejected and thrown away by the thing that is giving you identity, that's going to cause a scar in there. That even if you get a job and you get past it, there's going to be that hurt that is there, that can be permanent without some counseling and some internal work and putting it into context. It's just, people don't give that the weight that it needs. And if there's anybody out there listening that has gone through something like that, I'm very sorry for you, but know that you can get past it, but understand that you are more than your job. And I work with a lot of people. You are more than your bank account. Your bank account and that number does not define you, nor does your job. We need to work to define ourselves outside of those things.
I think what you're saying is reassuring and also frightening on two different levels. it's, it's reassuring because people who are chasing money, people who are chasing things, I mean, we're using money here, but
Yeah.
we could talk about success, we could talk about fame, we could really talk about anything. People who are chasing that, based on what you're saying, I think would be surprised if they found themselves in a situation where they had everything that they thought they wanted,
Hmm.
because it wouldn't change beyond that 6 months their baseline of how they feel. And that's reassuring in a sense, because maybe it can tell people, stop chasing so much. Stop thinking that you need to get a certain thing, because when you get that, you're not going to be in the state that you think it is. That might also be frightening to people because meanwhile, they've been chasing things that they think will give them happiness.
Right. Yeah. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? I say the joy is in the chase. The joy is in the struggle. It's the wanting. It's the ambition. And it's not that getting there is going to be great, but you've got to enjoy the journey. You've got to enjoy the process, because once you get there and you look around and go, "Oh, I got that. I'm not so happy. Nothing really has changed that baseline." Um, but the alternative is, so you don't chase, you don't work hard, you don't. No, it's enjoying the work. It's enjoying the struggle, because that is, and this is hard for people to get their minds around. That's where the happiness and the joy and building character. That's what life is. And if you're not enjoying that part, and you're thinking, well, when I retire, when I get that house, when I get the car, when I get the bank account, no, sorry, I'm talking to you from the other side. We're here. I talk to those people all the time. They've got it. They're not happy. Now, some of them are happy, but it's not, the happiness doesn't come from that.
Yeah. Wealthier people in general, it sounds, aren't necessarily happier than people who aren't in that high percentage. And I'm not talking about the people who are living in poverty and aren't
Absolutely.
able to fulfill their basic needs.
Absolutely.
But above that threshold, it sounds like everybody's got their problems, and you'll develop new problems once you're richer, and they'll affect your mood the same degree that they would affect quote unquote lower level problems of the same psychological magnitude.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's be clear. If you're living in poverty, money will change your life and will make you happier up to a certain point. And once you have your basic needs met, you have a home, you have transportation, you have purpose with employment, or you have a business, you've got your health, you've got your basic needs met. After that, money is not going to bring you that much more happiness. So it's just this threshold that that's important to understand.
I'm curious if people, when somebody gets, like I said, that person before, $5 million, does the stress of getting more money at least abate for a little bit? Or does the desire to still then get more money, because you're competing sort of with the rest of the world, still
Yes,
continue?
absolutely. The hunger's still there. And here's the thing. So um, this is, numbers are all relative to time, right? So when I first got out of college in 1992, I got a job at a community mental health agency and was making $14,000 a year, which to a college kid, that's a fortune, right? So, but I really struggled to pay rent, again, trying to understand what money is, and wasn't able to go out to restaurants, update my wardrobe. It was a struggle. And then I went to work for a hospital and almost doubled my salary to like $30,000 a year. And that was like amazing. It made me incredibly happy. So it worked. I doubled my income. I doubled my happiness. Now that's the key. I'm going to make $60,000 a year, right? It didn't really double my happiness level, right? So now I've got to work a little harder and I'm going to get up to 100. all right, so I can go on vacation and whatever, but really happiness, I'm going to try to double again, get up to 200. See, this idea that we attach, because it worked that first time, it worked the first couple of times, those bumps in, say, in salary. So we're going to go, well, it's got to work again. That once I get, and we're always chasing that next one, that's when it's going to kick in. It didn't work the last time, but the next, but see, our expectations change. It all becomes relative. Our needs, like, well, I kind of need the new car even though my old car is working. And so we're always in that chase because it does work at the beginning. You start making more, you start getting happier because you have less worry. But yeah,
Yeah, it's naive to think that once you hit a certain measure, then there aren't going to be new problems that you didn't even consider that arise, whether they're specifically related to that money you have, or whether they are just full new problems because our minds find problems, and that's the human condition, right?
yeah,
You think, oh, once I find that perfect girl or perfect guy that I'm going to spend my life with, if that's what you want to do, then a lot of people probably think, okay, great, that's all I need, and then I'll be good. And
yeah,
then you got new problems because that's not how life works.
right. That's it. But it's hard to get your mind around sometimes.
In terms of money, I want to explore a little more what you talked about before about other people and what it's like for a really, really rich person with that sense of maybe obligation or awkwardness that can arise about picking up the check every opportunity. And what do really rich people feel like in those situations? Do they feel that pressure that I don't want to go out for dinner maybe because I feel like there's this pressure to pay, or that it's always awkward even if they want to pay? Is there conversely maybe that they do want to pay but they don't want to demean somebody by paying all the time?
Right, right. There's all sorts of messy emotions in there. I mean, they're happy to pick up a tab, but is my friend going to feel like I'm rubbing my money in his nose? Or rubbing his nose in my money? Is it that's what it's going to feel like? Or why do I always have to? I mean, he's got a good job. Why didn't he pick up the check? And then all of a sudden, now we got to talk about it. And like we said, talking about money is hard. So it's complex emotionally. It depends on the relationship. Depends on the situation. That's why a lot of people will just throw parties in their home. A lot of very wealthy people, because we don't have to deal with it. Or we're going to rent out a restaurant. Everybody come. It's my birthday, whatever, and it's just a given. I'm doing this for you. Versus, oh, we're meeting up and having dinner, and the check comes and go. Now the stuff comes up, and I think that happens with the ultra wealthy, but also just middle class people too. Of who's going to do this because I'm happy to pick up the check, but I don't want to send a message of I know I'm richer than you, so I'm going to pick it up, right? So it's complicated.
I was going to ask what kind of advice you give clients, but it sounds like that's some good advice you just gave there. Maybe put yourself
Yeah,
in situations that have less potential for awkwardness.
yeah, absolutely. If you're, but also I'm working toward own it and be comfortable with your resources and have an open dialogue. And if a person really wants to pay, it's like okay, thank you. Thank you is very powerful. Just that, thank you.
What about situations where people, and I think a lot of people do this. I used to pontificate with one of my mentors when I was studying to be an ophthalmologist, and he loved getting lottery tickets just because he liked the pontification about it. He wouldn't win almost certainly, but he loved that period of a couple of days when he was waiting for the results, thinking, "What am I going to do?" And we would say, "How much would you give to this person? How much would you give to this person?" And then we got into the conversation, well, would you give any or would you buy gifts? How do people with a lot of money give money if they want to their close friends to make their lives easier, to people in their family? Is it generally something that is tough to do?
Yeah, it's tough to do. It's because people can use money as power. I'll pay for your education, but you have to go here, right?
Mm.
I People will abuse money, can by I'm going to give this to you, but this is how I want you to spend it, or this is the thing I want you to do in return. So that can happen. Um, they it changes the relationship, and I think that they're very very aware. Certainly after the first couple of times they do it, and they realize relationships are going to change because you've got this great friend that you were in college with or whatever, and you want to help him out and you give him this money, and all of a sudden that friendship changes. Can change, doesn't always, but it can change. A sense of obligation, a sense of I owe you. It just the power dynamic shifts, and they're very very aware of that, so they don't want to. And then of course, then they can come across as miserly because they're not giving their money away. So you see how things can get really really complicated and messy, and all this underlying stuff happening that's not talked about, and that can be toxic.
So if you won the lottery, for example, let's give you a really good lottery win.
Okay.
I'm just curious, based on all your experiences, and I know it's all circumstantial, so and we don't have to do this if this is too personal.
That's okay.
If you won the lottery and you came across $1 billion, it's a really really
Okay.
good lottery.
Yeah.
Based on your experience chatting with people who've dealt with all these problems, if you wanted to help people in your life because you're thinking, listen, $1 million would means nothing to me literally when I've just won $1 billion,
Mm-hmm.
I can dramatically transform your life. How would you approach that? What are some of the ways that you have seen are best, and or what are
Yeah.
some of the ways you've seen are worse?
It's
I don't know if you have an answer to that.
I don't really, because it's something that I thought about by working with these people. It is something that my wife and I talk about all the time. That coming into that level of money is dangerous, for lack of a better word. I think I would hopefully be open with everyone, and say, look, this is. That's why I named the podcast "Scary Money." This is scary money, and I'm going to make a choice to give all this away to charity. I'm going to create a trust fund, and close family money. I would probably give them a lump sum. It's like, here's some money. I don't want. I just want you to have this, and I'm not going to tell you how to use it. I would work to be pretty open about it, and again, letting other people go on their journey of acceptance of my change of life. Like if this bothers you, this is your problem. I can help as much as I can, but this is all you. So I'm not going to work too hard to help you come to terms with that. But letting other people, and if they want to talk about it, then trying to be as authentic as possible in talking about it, and knowing my history with this, understanding I value our friendship too much to endanger it by just giving you some money, because it's going to change. So it's not a real clear answer because I don't. It's a scary thing for me. That's why I don't play the lottery. It's like, I don't want that in my life.
And what would you say alternatively to the person on the other side of the coin who is friends with somebody who's really, really wealthy, and they might feel really awkward a lot of the time, just from their perspective of, I don't want to invite them to dinner because I don't want them to assume that I think they're paying for the check, because it probably messes with friendships from the other side too.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. And that's where you want to um, hopefully work to talk that through, and that's what friendship. I mean, if this is a real friend, like this is a complicating thing, and it's okay to talk about, because there's a difference between private and secret. Secret is dirty. Private is clean. And while money is a private thing, we can talk about it in a really clean way. Look, I know that you have this amount of money. It's weird. It's a complicating factor. Let's talk about this. And if I take you out to dinner, I'm taking you out to dinner, and I don't want you to feel like that I'm obligating you to pay. Simple conversation, and it's so appreciated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of the people you work with, I assume, have come into fame as well.
Yes.
What parallels do you see between that fame ladder and the money ladder? In terms
A
of,
lot.
you think, because there's people we look at where you're like, yeah, they must have it all. They're famous. And then I'm sure they have their own problems, of course, and they're magnified as well. So what are some of those parallels?
There is an isolation that goes along. So there's a parallel there. Nobody knows what it's like to go through fame except for other famous people, and there's not a lot of famous people. So now all of a sudden you're in a small world, and you really can't go out. Can you imagine the loss of anonymity? You can't go walk down the street or go to a restaurant without people coming up to you or taking your picture. There is this expectation that is put upon them to always be friendly. You can't have a bad day, and you need to look nice, and or you need to be like the character that you play in the film. And God forbid you play a bad person in the film, because everybody's just going to hate you and think that you're that person. I mean, it's a complicating. Fame is nasty. It's awful. And then you see the people that maybe grew up in a famous family, and so they know that world, they know how to protect themselves and manage that fame. And then those that win American Idol or become a famous baseball player or whatever, they don't know the rules. They don't know how to manage that. There's a lot of resentment, and there's a lot of difficulty there. It is, from the outside it looks amazing, but from the inside it's hard life to live.
And same with money, I imagine. And just like with money, I imagine the same rings true with fame, that when you get famous, when you become famous,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like, oh, great, I've got fame. You probably want more of it, right? Are
Oh,
these people, I mean, we look at people's Twitter followers and Instagram followers, and on some level, I kind of assume they don't care. They're above that, but they might be comparing their Twitter followers, even though it's in the millions, to another celebrity who they wish they were more famous than. Is that a thing?
yeah, that can be a thing. But yeah, there's a hunger, but there's also this fear with money and with fame that it could all go away,
Mm.
right? If I don't stay on top of it, if I don't get that next film made or that next record out, and what are the critics saying? There's this fear that it could all go away, and then who am I without that? Who am I if I invest or spend all this money and I don't have it anymore? Oh, that's the thing that defines me. Who am I without that? So there is a degree of fear that it could all go away, and that can be really scary.
So when you're chatting with clients, like you alluded to before, is there this element of outcome independence that you try to instill in them, where, like you said, it is about that journey, and kind of forget about the money you make, forget about the advances in the career that you achieve, because that is not ultimately what's going to sustain you. You need to make sure that this journey is sustaining you, because everything else
Right.
is.
Yeah. You have to have a balanced life. Your life has to be more than this one thing, whether it's a job or a relationship or fame or money. It has to be balanced, and you have to be diverse in who you are and what your adjectives are, the things that define you. Male, husband, son, podcaster, volunteer at church. You need to have different adjectives around you, not just rich guy. um, yeah. And what comes to mind, have you seen this show? I think it's Canadian, actually. The Schitt's Creek.
I haven't, but I've been told to watch it by many, many people.
Oh, it's so good. So good. And it's about this family who were very, 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 very wealthy and lose it all and have to move to this small town. And their journey of accepting their new life without wealth. And they struggle, and it's very funny. But also, you can see that there's true happiness that they find that they did not have before.
Maybe that relate. I mean, I haven't watched the show, so I maybe that relates to the fact, like you said earlier, somebody who's really rich might not even be working, whereas maybe you find new pursuits when you actually need that money that help give you that sense of purpose back.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Clay, are there any final messages you want to share with people, or on this notion of preconceived? Are there any biggest, what do you think is the biggest misconception? I think you've done a great job of busting a lot of misconceptions, but what's one of the biggest misconceptions you think people have about money and fame?
That having it is going to make you happy, and it's not. And I think happiness comes down to three things. It comes down, you must have autonomy. being able to do what you want, when you want, with the people you want to do it with. Not all the time, but one section in your life you need to have some kind of control over your time, and creativity, and not just art and music, but using your mind to come up with solutions to complex problems. Being creative. That's the second part of happiness. And the third part is to have purpose, to have a reason to get up in the morning, something that you believe in, something that gives you meaning in life. Those three things, and they may not always all three be in your job or in your relationship or in your hobbies, but somewhere in your life you need to have those three things. And then you're going to be happy. And the key to unhappiness is comparison. That's it. The key to unhappiness is comparison. Comparing yourself to the neighbor or to Bill Gates or to whoever, it's the key to unhappiness.
I absolutely love what you just said, the three tips, and I agree that we've done an episode on happiness before, and I said I think that comparison is, I mean, I'm not a therapist, but to me, comparison seems like the biggest, most prevalent trap to being unhappy. How do you try and not compare yourself when you're constantly surrounded by people, especially when social media is
Uh,
showcasing their lives all the time and it's begging for comparison?
First of all, get off social media. You want to solve your problems, get off social media if you can, or at least limit it. Put some boundaries around it. Um, to not compare is to focus on yourself. To focus on, are you doing better than you did last year? Are you pursuing your dreams? You can compare yourself to who you were and hopefully always getting a little bit better. And then you don't have enough time or room in your mind to worry about what your neighbor's doing because he's going to do his thing. You got to do yours.
Clay, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people learn more about you or learn more about your podcast and how to?
The site is walkandtalk.com. That's all spelled out. And the podcast should be launching in a couple of months. I've got my interviews done. And so that's called the Scary Money Podcast, and it will be available on iTunes.
And tell me a bit more about the podcast since you're just starting it. What kind of people are you interviewing?
Well, I had a podcast talking, instructing therapists on how to do online therapy. And so that's become a really important thing because nobody can see each other anymore. So now this new podcast is talking to people about the dangers of money and how to mitigate that and how to have a well-balanced life and yeah, talking about that.
It sounds really interesting. I will take a listen, and if it's up by the time we air this episode, I will put it in the episode notes. Thank you so much, Clay, for joining me, and
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. Thank you, Sam.
And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Preconceived. Have a great day.